Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So the title of the shir is Clothed with Dignity and Strength. And we know that the main focus of this week's Parsha, Tetzaveh, the garments worn by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and also by the regular Kohanim. I remember a number of years ago being incredibly moved to read of a discovery in Yerushalayim by a group of archaeologists. They effectively, or one of them effectively, put their hand inside a drainage ditch somewhere near, or somewhere perhaps on, or in the vicinity of the Har HaBayit of the Temple Mount, and they took out of this drainage ditch a tiny gold bell, and this was reported in the newspapers at the time, because, and this was I think in 2011, and the reason why it was so significant was because the archaeologists believed that the chances of finding that particular bell in the description and the way it was, and to actually it seemed too unlikely for it to be anything other, or certainly a very strong possibility that it might have actually even fallen from the robe of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. We know that the Kohen Gadol had these golden bells, Parmon V'Rimon, as it says, right, with pomegranates and the bells round the bottom of the meal. And the most amazing thing about this is they literally lifted this little bell, 2,000 years old at least or more, from the drainage ditch, and they shook it and it rang, and they could hear the sound. And it's just the most remarkable story, and I think it almost encapsulates the puzzle that exists over this parasha, which is, what is the purpose? What is the function of these clothes, these garments? They are in such detail. And it's not the same as last week. We know that last week's parsha, there's exceptional detail in terms of the construction of the items needed for the Mishkan, and then later for the temple, for the Beit HaMikdash. We understand that that is for the whole of the Jewish people. Here it is for a very small group of people, and most of them are for one individual, for the Kohen Gadol. And what is the purpose? What is the Kohen Gadol meant to do with these garments? Are they a message for him? Are they a message for other people? What are we supposed to take out of it? And if you like, that little bell, I think, really symbolizes that. Because as he would walk, those bells would shake. And we recall that a little bit today with the bells that we have them to put on top of the Sefer Torah, so that we know when the Sefer Torah is coming. And the question hangs over it, is that sound for him, or is it for other people? Is it to remind him of his status and position? Or is it to remind other people that the Kohen Gadol is coming? So this is a very, very deep parsha, very mystical, very deep ideas that are contained within it, and we're going to try and see if we can uncover some of them. One of the most fascinating things about this parsha, as we'll come to later on, is the use of the word tiferes, which means splendor. That the garments are meant to be lechovod or lesifares, to be for honor and for tiferet. What does tiferet mean? What does splendor mean? Rav Moshe Shapiro will try and share some of his ideas a little bit later on. He says that I think this is the only place where the Torah specifically requires us and tells us to make something that is beautiful, splendor. What is it about these garments? But unfortunately, in order to understand it properly, we have to begin before we get to the garments themselves, and that is with another puzzle. The whole first part of the parsha is extremely difficult to understand. Why is it here? What does it mean? And what is the unusual phraseology? So let's just look at some of the psukim inside, right at the beginning, chapter 27, verse 20. Chav. Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Chav. V'ata, and you, tetzaveh, you shall command. Es b'nei Yisrael. Did you hear the way I translated that? You're going to tell me it's wrong. What do you mean, and you shall command? That's what it says. V'ata, tetzaveh, and you shall command. What does that mean? V'ata tetzaveh es b'nei Yisrael. And they shall take to you shemen zayis zoch, this the purest oil, kosis lamor, which is crushed in order to be for the lamp, for the shining light of the menorah, lahalos ner tomid, in order there to be an everlasting light. Ba'oil moed, in the tent of meeting, chutz laparoches, outside the curtain which separates the kodesh and the kodesh hakadoshim, the holy of holies, and the holy part of which is of lesser sanctity, mechutz laparoch asher al hoedos, which is in front of the tablets of testimony. Yarochos, so Aaron and his children shall order it, me'erev ad boker, from evening until morning, lifnei Hashem, in front of Hashem, chukas olam, an everlasting statute, l'dorosom, for their generations, me'es b'nei Yisrael, from the children of Israel. And there are a number of questions here. A number of these questions are shared by the Kli Yakar, but they are just questions which become immediately obvious when you read the words. Number one, we've already mentioned, what is the v'ata? And you shall command. Why now is there this use of v'ata? And in fact, that word v'ata occurs 3 times here, in close proximity. It says v'ata, and you shall command, in terms of the oil for the menorah. Then the next parsha, which is the beginning of the description of the garments of the high priest, it says v'ata, and you hakrev elecha, bring close to you es Aaron achicha, Aaron your brother, Aaron your brother. In other words, he shall be introduced into this role as the Kohen Gadol, as high priest. And then we have again a few pasukim later, chapter 28, verse 3, Gimel, v'ata, and you tedaber el kol chachmei lev, you shall speak to all those who are wise, and that is about how they shall make the garments. So the first question is, what is this repetitive use of the word v'ata? Then we had mentioned as well, why is that the double phrase? In Hebrew, you would need to just say tetzaver or v'ata. It doesn't make sense to have, it would seem, that double U. Next question, why here do we find the word tetzav? What was that?
I was saying, the way ArtScroll is translating it, it's almost implying that it's uttered with an I.
No, well, it isn't. I understand. Yeah, well, this is the problem with the translation. You're always going to have. It's not. That's not an exact translation. It's done. Yeah, translations are always there in order to help you understand it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to untranslate anything. But it's an interpretation, exactly. Tetzaver. What is that word tetzaver? Why is that being used here? Tetzaver means you shall command. Tetzaver, you shall command. The whole of last week's parsha, that word is not used. There are instructions given again and again. Va'asisa, exactly. You shall do, you shall make. Va'asu, they shall make, right? Make. Why? Because Hashem is telling Moshe that you shall make, or instruct others to make and construct these various items. But here we have this use of the word command. Secondly, or next question, why is it that the command for the oil is given now? Because the Mishkan itself hasn't yet been built. The logical place to put this is not here. We are in the process of describing the items that are needed for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, and we will go on to describe the garments of the Kohen Gadol, which fits, because once you've described what needs to be made, there are various questions, because some of the implements are left over for next week's parsha, Kitzissa, like the Kiyar, they used to wash their hands from the Kiyar, that's left over to later on, the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden altar as well. So there are a number of questions in terms of the order, but certainly, the requirement here to prepare the oil, the olive oil, doesn't seem to fit. They've got to still build the thing. Remember that the description of the Mishkan is repeated at least 3 times in the Torah. You have the description here, which is Hashem telling Moshe, this is what you should do. You have in Vayakel and Pekudei, right, Moshe telling the people what to do, and then them actually doing it, which is at the end of Pekudei, well, actually building it, right? So it's very interesting. And why is it here that the oil is over here? So we have to understand, I think, that these 2 psukim, they really set the tone for the whole parsha. And one of the keys and one of the codes to understand this parsha has to be from something that is not here, that is absent. And this is highlighted to us by the Baal HaTurim. It's quite well known, but it's important to see it inside. The Baal HaTurim was born in 1270 in Cologne, and he passed away in 1340 in Toledo, which was then in the Kingdom of Castile. He was the 3rd son of the Rosh, and a really, really, really important figure. Primarily, his commentary on the Torah is also obviously vital and central, but in a halachic sense, he fulfilled an incredibly important role in terms of the transmission of the halachic tradition. He wrote a work called the Arba Turim, the 4, which is known as the Torah for short, and the Arba Turim is significant because it was named after this week's parsha, in the sense that the 4 Turim, the 4 rows, were the rows of precious stones on the breastplate of the high priest, the Choshen Mishpat, right? And you'll see that in the parsha, it lists the names of those gems and those precious stones, and each one is called a tur, a row. Yeah? Exactly. Each one has, and they have a they all have, all those gems are named, and he named his primary halachic work the Arba Turim, the 4 rows. Why the 4 rows? Because, well, it's all precious stones, because each of the 4 sections was another part of the of halakha, right? You have Orach Chaim, which is the way of life, which is our regular day-to-day living. Yoredeya includes other aspects that are essential for life, for living as Jews, such as kashrut, etc., and other areas. You have the third one is Even Ho'ezah, which deals with laws primarily involving marriage and divorce and other such aspects. And then Choshen Mishpat, which is business law and civil law and etc. So this is the Torah. The Torah tells us like this, the first source, Lehiskim Moshe B'zeh HaSeder. This is the only parsha in the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear once. Moshe does not appear in Tetzaveh at all. Obviously, Moshe's name doesn't appear before he's born. But once Moshe Rabbeinu enters the story, right, he is in every single parsha till the end of the Torah except for Tetzaveh. Masha ein kein b'chol HaChumash, except for the rest of the Chumash. Shemeshah shenolad Moshe ein seder shelo yuzkar bo. Because from the time when Moshe was born, there is no parsha in the Torah where he has not mentioned Vatam, and the reason is Mishum Shenemar. Because in next week's parsha it says Mecheni no misifracha asher kasavta. When he davens, and for the Jewish people to be saved after the sin of the Egel Azav, the golden calf, he says, wipe me out, erase me, that's what Moshe says, from your book that you have written. And he does that because he is so desperate for the Jewish people to survive that he puts himself on the line. And when Hashem says, there'll be another nation, we'll start again. And he says, no, if you're not going to keep this people, then wipe me out as well. That's what he says. We know that the curse of a wise man, a Talmid Chacham, a wise person can be, even if it's given conditionally. Even he said, only if these people are eradicated, even though it was a conditional thing, nevertheless it still came to pass in some way. V'niskayim bozeh. And it was fulfilled through his name not being in this parsha. Now, we're not going to go into the order of things here. There is a famous debate as to whether Truma and Tetzaveh and the command to build the Mishkan preceded the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, or came afterwards. In the order of the Torah, it is before, because next week's parsha talks about the golden calf, but there's a famous, huge debate amongst the early commentators when exactly was it a response to the golden calf or it was a precursor in some way, and that's a separate debate. But either way, this obviously leaves more questions in a way than it answers. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu prays for the Jewish people, and Hashem says, and he says, I want to give up everything for them, to the extent that I shouldn't appear at all. Yet, why this parsha? Why is it here, this one? This one particularly, he shouldn't appear. So the Baal HaTurim himself gives an answer in his second response. He says, Va'od zu parsha medaberes b'tachsisei kona. But he says it as Va'od, it's a separate reason. This parsha, it speaks about the tachsisei kona, the items that were needed for the Kohanim. And from Moshe, the high priest that was meant to descend, because he refused to go as an agent of Hashem, and it was taken away from him and given to Aaron. So if you go back to that dialogue that took place at the bush, the snare, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't want to do it. And he refuses again and again and again. And part of the result of that is there's some aspect of it that he doesn't do. And that's taken away from him. And the high priesthood is given to his brother Aaron, right? And therefore, Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned in this parsha because of the pain that he himself suffered through having to give up this key role of serving as the Kohen Gadol, as the high priest, and his brother had to do it instead. So, again,
we don't show that Agmas Nafsho was the Rebbeinu Shalom's pain.
You could do. I don't think that's a simple explanation. You mean that because
the Rebbeinu Shalom was distressed, therefore he took
had to take it away because he had to take it away from him. Yeah, interesting. Okay, it could be. But either way, I think it's fair to say these are two separate. He clearly sets them out as two separate explanations. So the second explanation helps us understand why it is that in this parsha he doesn't appear, because this parsha is the one where it's painful for him to be there because he's not able to fulfill this role because he said, I don't want to do it, and he resisted taking on the challenge of leading the Jewish people, and that was the consequence. But according to the first reason, he doesn't explain why it's particularly this parsha, and why it is that Moshe doesn't appear here. So following the line of that first explanation, we can try and set out the following idea. You see, this parsha, there is the absence of Moshe Rabbeinu, yet equally there is the influence of Moshe, felt exceptionally and especially strongly. And that we can understand, and we'll see as we'll develop this through the Kli Yakar's ideas, is held in the word va'ata. The word va'ata, in a way, is even stronger than his name. You understand, right? It's direct. You need to do this. The influence of Moshe Rabbeinu is present, but he is absent at the same time. So this is very, very interesting. We have his name being absent, but he is directly involved. You, and that repetitive use of the word you. So first, let's understand, the Rashbam tells us, and this is in a way the key, is the word tetzaveh. The Rashbam says, this is the next source, remember the Rashbam was the grandson of Rashi. It says like this, he says that above it says, Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, this is source 2, v'yichuli truma, and they shall take for me truma. Lefi shor, tzorech HaMishkan, the donation that was made temporarily that was needed for the Mishkan. What is the key difference? This is a command for all future generations. They'll say shemen lamor l'chol shana v'shana, to have oil for the light for all future generations. Lekachu omer, that's why it says va'atat tetzaveh, and you shall command. Shina haloshen, it changes. Because always the use of the word command, it means for future generations. He brings sources in the Midrash for that. So that's what it means. The word tzavah, tzivui, means a command. And it's a command to tzaveh, means to command. And it's a command that always means not just this generation, but all future generations. Whereas last week's parsha was effectively a one-off. They had to build them then. It wasn't future generations. Yes, they would need to later on in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, but ultimately that was only for then, whereas this is for all future time. So there is this idea that there's something going on here that is for all time, that is eternal. Now, if you turn over to the next page, the Kli Yakar develops what is the idea of this, the significance of Moshe Rabbeinu's role here. The key, he says, to understand what is really happening in this parsha, this very first section, can you see this? Page 2, it's source 3, is that when the Torah says, lahalos ner tomid, to ensure that there is a constant light, it doesn't mean the lights of the menorah. It doesn't mean all of the lights of the menorah. It means one specific light. Look what he says. He brings it from the Ramban, first line. V'nirli Yashiv kol zeh mashekosov Ramban. The Ramban tells us that when it says to rise up, to light up a ner, a lamp, constantly, hainu ner ma'arovi. This was the westernmost lamp, shoyodolek la'olam, the light that would always burn. Aval shar hanerus, the other lights, lo hoyu tomid, they weren't eternal. Kiyim me'erev ad boker, they were only from evening to morning. Bahanochazu, he says, with this concept, Yiturtsu kol asfeikus aniskorim, we answer all of the questions, a number of them we went through. Because, let me summarize a few lines, he says that Hashem commanded Moshe about the Mishkan and all the Kalim, the implements. And the Mishkan is divided into 3 sections. And about all 3 sections it says, create for me a mikdash, a holy place, and we discussed this, what that means last time. V'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell amongst you, amongst them. I will be amongst the people. What's the problem? The problem is that where is the divine presence resting? In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the holiest place, right? Where the Oren is. That's where the Shekhinah is. And there is a curtain, there's a poroches, which divides between that place and the rest. V'rotza Moshe, 6 lines down, Shebachol chelek yedova hamora ala shashchina shruya b'Yisrael. What Moshe Rabbeinu wants to achieve, and he asks Hashem to demonstrate this, is that the people should be able to connect with every part of the sanctuary, that presence of Hashem. If it only is in the Holy of Holies, who's going to be able to see that, connect to it? No one can even enter. He says, "V'nei b'kodesh hakadoshim o yuluchos ha'edus." There were the tablets of testimony. Ashinu edus Hashem ne'emona shashchina shruya sham. Right, that there were tablets there. And those were the key evidence that the divine presence was there. And he explains how that is. Let's skip a few lines. So he says, okay, so people would see if they came in, but who goes in? No one goes in. No one is allowed in. Only the Kohen Gadol once a year goes inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And therefore, maybe there would be a place and an ability for people to say, okay, yes, maybe Hashem's presence is here, maybe not. And this creates doubts in people's mind. It's a problem. And therefore he says over the bold print, Hashem had to make also in the sanctuary, the rest of it, this constant miracle with the westernmost lamp, so that everyone would be able to see it. That they would see from the western lamp, the light of the menorah, that would never go out, because the lamp, that light of the Ner Ma'arovi would always burn, it would be lit, and it would last longer than all of the others. They would see that the name of Hashem was there, because there's this curtain dividing and hiding away the Aron, and maybe that's what needs to be. Not everyone can approach the holiness of the Aron, but the Ner, the lamp, is critical. You have a question, Ibn?
Isn't there a parish which says that on the Chagim, the curtain was rolled back so that they could actually...
That's a very good... Yes. The Gemara says that. And there were an ability to see at certain points of the year. Yeah, that's fair enough. But either way, you still want something that's constant. They still needed something. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted there to be something constant, right?
But also this Ner B'Marav was the forerunner of the Nes Chanukah.
Yes. Of course, there's the link to Chanukah as well, and why that is, etc., etc. Yeah, that's right. But the point is the eternal flame. That's the point, right? So you have to understand this literally, as in, yes, we see. In other words, we're describing what was present. There was present the eternal flame, this Ner Ma'arovi, which burned forever, and people would therefore draw inspiration. But there's a message here as well. There's a message of how to take the inspiration from the Aron, which people could not see or have access to the whole time, and keep that burning brightly and strongly. And he brings that beautifully in the next piece as well. He carries on. To understand this and about this idea, it says, Shekol Parsha Zu, he says, this is not about the lights of the menorah. That is not what this is about. If you go to Parshas Emor, you will see that it describes the lights and how to light the menorah and how to do that. That's not what we're talking about here at all. He says, this is all about this one light. Legalus LeMoshe, to tell Moshe Rabbeinu that even though the curtain is covering the ark, nevertheless there is this constant miracle of this light that burns the whole time. What has he got to do with Moshe himself? The reason is as follows. He says, look at the bold print. It says, he brings a pasuk in Devarim, Vayah Reishis Lo, the Moshe Rabbeinu was the first. Moshe Rabbeinu was the first for everything that became and followed in a miraculous sense. Moshe himself fulfilled this role of being like this one light. He is like the one from whom many lights are lit, but that original flame is never dimmed. Because he explains how that original divine inspiration of being that the most exceptional of all Nevi'im, of all prophets, that rests on Moshe Rabbeinu, and from there, that goes to others who are then able also. Future Nevi'im prophets would have that same sense of prophecy. And he says the same idea is expressed with this idea of the Ner Ma'arovi, the Western lights. I'm about 6 lines from the end, sorry I'm skipping a bit. That was constantly, through a miracle, it came from the light of Moshe. That he was the middle, if you like, between the light that came from Hashem to all of the other lights, to the light shining in general for the Jewish people and beyond. And what is the sign of this, he says? When Moshe Rabbeinu is born, it says, that the whole house was filled with light. The whole house was filled with light when he was born, that he should be the one to be able to pass this on. And therefore he says, that is why it says, Va'ata tetzaveh. You shall command. Because the command is, last few lines, Va'ata, one second, mimahus atzmuscha, from the essential part of your own nature, v'tosefes ora shebach, that extra light that you've merited, the tzaves b'nei Yisrael. You tell the children of Israel to carry that further forward. V'yikhu elecha shemen. They should take that oil to carry that light forward into the future when you are not there. He doesn't say that, but I think that's what he means. There's the absence of Moshe and the presence of Moshe in this parasha. Moshe Rabbeinu is entirely absent in name, but he is present more than ever before, because the whole essence of the beginning of the parasha is Hashem is saying, you will not always be here for this people. So give them a way of carrying the light which you have shown them as a leader forward into future generations. And that is the same idea as the Ner Ma'arovi, the light of that menorah which constantly burns, carrying forward the light of the Oran HaKodesh, of the Oran that is inside the Holy of Holies. The light is carried forward. So too, Va'atot Tzaveh. Hashem is saying, put some of yourself in them, through giving them this command to light this light, so that they will continue this path. Because if you don't do that, there will not be an ability for them to continue this journey. Do you have a question?
I just wondering, wasn't the first day of creation the hint of that light, related to the light of Moshe?
The light of Moshe could be. I'm not familiar particularly. It could be. I'm not sure.
Light.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not particularly, especially familiar with that idea of the light of Moshe. And it could be. There are lots of different references to the light. What is the light of the Sheshes Mebereshis? Yeah.
Does this tie in any way with the Keren Ponov?
Yeah,
the beams of light.
The light. Well, the whole presence of that light. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that next week or not. What it is about the fact that the light shines from him. Ki Koran or Ponov. Yeah. There's the concept of light and how that attaches to Moshe Rabbeinu seems to be very significant. But I think the key point that I wanted to bring out from this Kli Yakar is, apart from understanding these psukim, which is so important, is that you see the role of a leader is to help people shine themselves. Is to make sure that they can stay shining bright even when that leader is not there. Because if the leader doesn't do that, then the leader has not fulfilled their role. And this is so beautifully expressed with the whole of the beginning part of this parasha. Tell them how to keep that light burning constantly. You, by the influence you've had, by the fact that you have this light that you've been granted, it's not good enough to keep it with you. Remove yourself from the picture, but let the light continue to shine. And I was reminded of the most beautiful story that Yehuda Avner brings in his book, The Prime Ministers. If you haven't read that book, then read it. Yehuda Avner was a diplomat. He was originally from Manchester, so he was from the UK, and he served as a diplomat for a number of different prime ministers. And he wrote this fantastic book, Israeli prime ministers, and he wrote this fantastic book where he describes his experiences, and he was there at pivotal moments of the history of the state of Israel. He doesn't hide the fact that he was, the one he admired the most was Menachem Begin, and he had a very close relationship with Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin wanted to give a speech. His English wasn't so great. So he used to write the speech and then he used to give it to Yehuda Avner, and he says, when they asked him to Shakespeareize it for him. He called himself as Shakespeare. And he used to write the speeches out like that. Anyway, so one of his travels he went obviously many times backwards and forwards to Washington, and he went to New York at one stage, and he went to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he tells this most beautiful story about how he asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he says, what is it? How do you do what you do? What is it you do? How are you able to have such a great influence on so many people? Lubavitcher Rebbe had the most incredible influence on many different people and leaders and everything else. And he said to him, I'll tell you what I do. He says, I look at the human being, right, as a candle with a flame. Because a candle, a wick and a flame, right? And the candle represents the body and the wick is on top. And all I try and do is I try and see how the flame on the top, right, can burn brightly, so that the spiritual element, that the physical body can effectively become one with the spiritual element. Let the spiritual element burn brightly. So in other words, you're able to light the flame of all these Jewish souls. In words, something to that effect he was trying to convey. So Yehuda Avner said to him, well, is the Rebbe able to help light my flame, help me burn brightly in that way, in a spiritual sense? And the Rebbe said to him, I can't do that. I can give you the flame, but only you can light it yourself. Which is such a lovely kind of moving concept, you know. I can provide the flame, but if you don't take the flame and light your own wick, then it won't help, and nothing will help. And I think that's really what this is being, what the Kli Yakar, the depth of the meaning behind this interpretation. So the Kli Yakar also tells us, and he goes on to say essentially, the next two sources are really, we don't have to see this inside, but he develops the same idea with the next two. He says, why does it say Va'atah kreve lecha es Aaron achicha? Right? Again, you bring Aaron close to you. Really, because it again had to be Moshe himself in the picture, because he's following the opinions that this episode happens after the golden calf. So Aaron is pushed away effectively, right? Because of his involvement in the golden calf, right? With the gold and everything else. And therefore, Moshe is the one who davens, he prays for Aaron to not suffer a negative fate as a result of his involvement. So it's va'ata, it's you. You are the one who has to bring Aaron close, right? And similarly, the other thing he says is also for those people who, the ones who actually will construct the garments, will put them together, the same thing. They were called the Chachmei Lev, those who were wise of heart. Because again, they were influenced by Moshe Rabbeinu. It was his direct influence that allowed them to benefit and, if you like, grow from the Ruach HaKodesh, the spiritual inspiration, the divine inspiration that they merited in order to make these garments. So now that we understand this, let's understand what it is and what is the key message of the garments themselves. And we're just in the remaining time we have, without going into the specifics of the specific symbolism of these garments and what they all mean, let's just understand a bit of a journey in terms of their purpose. So the words that are used in the Torah is chapter 28, verse 2, V'asiso vigdei kodesh la'aron achicha, you shall make clothes, garments of holiness for Aaron your brother, l'chovod u'lesifares, for dignity and strength. We can try, it's really not really strength, splendor. But I've used it as strength, and you'll see why. That's not a translation. Strength, it means splendor, absolutely, right? But the word strength is important to me because I think that's what we're trying to convey. We're trying to convey in one sense, and we'll see how that is. So the Ramban tells us, and that's the next source on the sheet, what does it mean, l'chavod u'lesifares? What does it mean to honor and splendor? Sheyeh nichbad u'mafayar b'malbushim nichbadim u'mafayar. This is source 6. That he should be honored and full of splendor with garments that are themselves a source of honor and splendor. And then the rest of the Ramban, he goes through how each of these garments were particularly significant. They were levushei malchus. They were garments that were worn by royalty in those times. Kidmuson yilbashu hamalachim mizman Torah. These were the garments that kings would wear at the time of the Torah. And he brings various sources that, various psukim that support this from other parts of Tanakh, right? He says, for example, in the second paragraph, Vahamitz Nefes, which was the hat, Yudua Gam Hayom LeMelachim VeLasorim Agdolim, that great kings and princes wear this turban-like hat. Certainly in certain parts of the world, that was definitely the case. And therefore, he says that was the idea. That was the idea, and why he was required to wear them, why they were required to wear these garments. So, if you like, that is the simple. It's not simple. It's Ramban. The pshat explanation as to why it is that these garments needed to be worn. It was in order so that Aaron himself could command the respect and, more importantly, the consent of the people. To be a leader requires both respect and consent. Yes, there are dictators who can claim to be leaders without the consent of the people, or they say they don't need the consent of the people, but we all know that is a fallacy. Even a dictator, will be overthrown if the people do not consent to his leadership. So the idea of the garments is to help the people understand that they need to have that dignity and respect for the office of the high priest. But of course it goes beyond that. The Sforno tells us the word letifares, to splendor, he says, the word covered, he says, honor means for the honor of Hashem, when these holy garments to the service of Hashem. What does it mean, letiferes? Sheyeh kohen mora nora al kol sevivo, so that the kohen, the high priest, should show and demonstrate awe on all those around him. Shem Talmidov Hachakukim Aliboy Ksefov. They are his students that are engraved on his heart and his shoulders. Now this refers to the stones, the precious stones. The precious stones were in a few places. They were on the breastplate itself, engraved on the stones with the names of the 12 tribes, but also on the special stones which were called the Avnei Miluim, which were on the straps of the ephod. The garment, which is called the apron, which was wrapped around him, had straps that went behind him and over onto his shoulders, and on the top there was a mishbetzes, which was a setting in gold, within which rested special precious stones, and they were called the Avnei Miluim. Miluim means to fill, because the stones filled the golden setting. And on those stones also were engraved the names of the Shvatim of the tribes itself. So what the Sephona is telling us is that this word Tiferes implies or has an understanding that the role of the Kohen, and the Kohen Gadol particularly, is to have a positive influence on his students, on those under him, and those Talmid, in this sense, it's the whole of the Jewish people. It has to be used as a force for good. But the Malbim and Rav Moshe Shapiro takes this further. The Malbim says like this. The Malbim tells us, this is the final source here, Malbim was born in 1809, he died in 1879. He was a rabbi in many different places. He did not have an easy life and moved around a lot. He spent a lot of his time actually combating the early reform movement, to the extent that in Bucharest, in Romania, where he was chief rabbi, he was evicted, he was thrown into prison. And Moses Montefiore had to save him from prison and secured his release. But he was thrown out of Romania, and after that he had many posts as a rabbi in various parts of the Russian Empire. So he tells us like this. The first bit he says is, what is garments of holiness? I'll summarize the first paragraph first. He says, garments of holiness are, yes, literal garments, but the whole idea of the garments is meant to reflect something internal, a difference. What is a difference in outlook, in perspective, right? They're meant to make the person who wears them think and feel differently. Like we mentioned before with the bell, it's about others, but it's also about the person themselves. You hear the bell, I've got a role, I've got a responsibility to play in life. And then he says, there's a difference between kovod and tiferes. What is kovod, he says? That he says the soul, it's in the second paragraph, it's explained to us in every place. The soul of a person is called honor, right? It says leman yazamercha chovod v'lo yedom. We say that in Mezmor Shechan HaKasabayis, so that my honor will sing to you and not be silent. What is my honor? It refers to the nefesh, the soul of a person. So therefore, the garments of holiness, the soul is clothed in these garments. Okay. What is Tiferes? He says, look at the bold print. A person can be honored with a natural strength or something that comes from external to the person. That means to say, a certain spiritual status or a certain appointment that a person has that gives the person honor. A person cannot achieve splendor, different to honor, unless they exercise their free will. Ma'ala b'chirit, he says. That can only come through free will. The soul, the human soul, is incredible. It's spiritual, it's holy, and that's granted from Hashem. But mitzat ha'or v'hodor shetiska alidei avodoso kedushosa nikres tiferes. But it's only called splendor, tiferet, through what it works at, right? The efforts the soul puts into its own advancement in life, the spiritual advancement in life. And therefore he says that these two levels, this is what they had to try and achieve. This is what the Kohenim and the Kohen Gadol particularly was designed to achieve. That Moshe Rabbeinu was told, Shi'alamdein, last two lines, he should teach them, V'yasayea usom, and support them, B'schuso, in his merit, Le'eslabesh b'levushi yakar v'hodor, to clothe themselves in garments of honor and splendor, or b'zeh yasa bigdei kodesh l'nefesh ha'nikres kovod and l'nefesh ha'nikres tiferes. And through that they would be able to wear garments. That, and again, thinking of garments not in just in the physical garments, but in the message they're meant to convey, that both demonstrate the spiritual status the person has been given, but also the spiritual status the person has worked out for themselves. Because the role of the Kohanim, and this is what links so beautifully to the influence of Va'ata, that Hashem tells Moshe, you need to show them how to live their lives in a way that is uplifting, that even if you're not there, they will continue to make ensure that light burns the whole time. And it is the same thing with these garments. The message that Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, what he's telling them to do, is to help the Kohanim understand that it's not good enough for them to sit back and say, we have a role. We are appointees to a particular role. We are due honor because of the garments that we wear. That's not good enough, right? Because we wear these garments, therefore everyone should respect us. No, that's not good enough. You will not achieve the level of tiferet, of splendor, unless you have and you exercise your own free will, your own bechira. And this is really, this really comes to a deeper point and a deeper understanding with what the word tiferet means. And this is really a mystical and deeper idea. Ramosha Shapiro, who was a contemporary, he passed away relatively recently, deep thinker, he says that really what Tiferet means, and remember, he's the one who says this is the only place in the Torah where it refers specifically to make something beautiful. What is Tiferet? What is splendor? It's not just any beauty. He says it's harmony. The greatest beauty is created when you harmonize contrasts, when you take two different things and you contrast them, and he says that creates something beautiful. He brings examples of this. He says what creates a truly amazing view, right? A contrast. So mountain with a valley or something like that, right? That's what makes something really beautiful. Similarly with music, right? If you play the same note the whole time, that music is not great. The contrast in the music makes the music beautiful. That's what it is. And he says that essentially, that is what is going on here. Because what the Kohanim are meant to do, and their role, is to somehow bring harmony between what is the greatest divide of all. They're supposed to make something beautiful out of this earthly, debased and lowly world, and especially the people within this world, who can often get so many things wrong, and the highest, lofty, most spiritual realm, as represented by the Mishkan. That's what they're doing. That's what the Kohen Gadol is meant to do. They're meant to go inside this place, right? Perform the service in the Mishkan, connect with V'asuli Mikdash, create for me a Mikdash, V'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell amongst them. How are they meant to do that? How on earth are they able to do that? And the answer is because the Kohanim are called upon to somehow create that harmony, the harmony between this complicated and lowly world and the spiritual world above. And that is what effectively the garments themselves are meant to do. It takes effort. That's what the Malbim is telling us. The fact that they've been given the garments is not good enough. That creates covered. They've got honor, but it's not Tiferet. Tiferet is only through their own efforts, their own work, and to work on that themselves is the key. That is the critical thing. To create harmony means that the garments that are at the same time, the garments are mysterious. They conceal. That's what they do. They hide. But ultimately, if they're used in the right way, they can influence the person to ensure the person themselves is able to make a difference and is able to show and shine a light on a message and a mission, not just for themselves, but indeed for the whole of the Jewish people. There is another piece to this, which we don't have time to develop, which is, and I'll leave you with this thought, because maybe you'll be able to work out what the connection is and why it is that there's so many references to garments and clothes in the Purim story. Why is it we conceal ourselves on Purim? Why do we dress up? Why do we conceal ourselves so much? What is the link between all of this and the Purim story? So we'll leave you with that thought, and maybe we'll have a chance to discuss it another time, or if you have any ideas on how it connects, then you can share it with me. All right, take care.